Hello everyone, welcome back. Today we're going to be talking about the weakest point of an AK-47. Okay. Now we're not talking about the weakest point user-wise, right? We're not talking about whether it's more difficult to change the magazines or harder to mount optics or adjust the gun. What I'm talking about is the weakest point mechanically. Okay. Now, let me jump ahead and say there's not that many weak points mechanically, but basically, I will tell you what I have found to be the weakest point. Now, like any semi-automatic that's magazine fed, the weakest point is usually the magazine, okay? And now these are Tapcos. I have a bunch of them, at least 20 of these. I've been using these for about 6-7 years now, and these Tapcos have done great for me. I've not had any problems. There's very little wear on them, despite the high usage. Which is a good thing in the sense that most AK guys will tell you that these are like horrible magazines, and I believe that and I'll accept that. But the point is that the most horrible magazines have still been doing very well for me. Okay? What you want in an AK magazine is something like these Serbian ones, which are made out of steel, and they have the reinforced lips. Okay, so you got the steel lips, which are then additionally reinforced. That's ideally what you want in an AK-47 magazine. These do rust, so basically you want to put some wax on them, keep them oiled, that kind of stuff. So that aside, okay, going beyond the magazine, what is the weakest point of the AK-47? And what I have found, it is the shepherd pin. Okay, now the shepherd pin. Okay, if you look at an AK-47, right? The main parts are riveted in place, right? You see these rivets here. But if you look at if you look at the hammer and the trigger, you'll notice that those two pins are not riveted in place. Okay, what they are is there's a pin in there, and you can kind of see that little pin. Actually, let me take this out. There you go. All right. So if I hold this up over here, okay, there's my hammer. There's a spring that wraps around the hammer. There's a disconnector. There's a spring on the disconnector, right? And then if you look right there, you'll see that thin little pin. Looks almost like a paper clip. And what that does is it wraps around the. This is the safety bar here, right? That's the safety bar. It wraps around, and the safety bar basically connects at that point, and at this point over here, there's a pin over here, and that shepherd pin wraps around that, and then what that does is it pushes down. It pushes down on the trigger pin to hold that in place, and then it pushes behind the hammer pin to hold that in place. Okay, and the way I found out about it is basically at one point I wanted to adjust the tension on the safety lever, and the way you do that is you basically lift it up to 90 degrees and you bend it in or out depending on what type of tension you want. And in doing so, I did not realize that the shepherd pin basically got out of place, and then while I was shooting, the trigger pin started walking out on me, and then I realized what had happened. So in order for this to fail, basically you have to do something to the gun. Like in my case, I actually took the gun apart, not apart, but I moved the safety lever. Okay, so it's probably not just going to happen on its own, and in fact, have this AK here only has about 600-700 rounds on it. This one here, this M90, right? This is a Serbian one. This one has about well over 10,000 rounds. Not that much more than 10,000 rounds, but it has about 10,000 rounds on it. I've only cleaned it twice. All right, and if let me get that pointer. With all that shooting, that shepherd pin has not moved out of place. You can see it right there. Pointing right there. See that shepherd pin as it wraps around the pin? Basically it wraps around the end of the safety bar over here. All right, and then it pushes down on the trigger bar, and then behind the hammer. Okay. Now the reason why this is worth mentioning is because, normally we think of AK-47s. We normally say, hey, listen, you can use this thing as a shovel, and it's still, it's not going to break. And because of that shepherd pin, I'm going to say that, that's not necessarily true. You want to be a little bit careful about beating up the gun too hard. Now, it's also worth mentioning that there's a plate that you can buy. It only costs $10. That will replace that that shepherd pin, and I highly recommend it. And basically, most of the hardcore AK-47 guys, that's usually the first thing that they will change. I pulled out my my Sega 12, which is basically an AK-47 shotgun, to look at it and see what it had, because I can see it has the same pins. They're not, the trigger pin and the hammer pin are not riveted. You know, it's a pin. And basically they also have a pin. It's not a normal shepherd pin because it doesn't wrap around the pin that holds the safety lever in place. It wraps around the trigger bar, and then it pushes on the hammer. It wraps around the trigger pin, and then it pushes forward on the hammer pin. So it uses a type of a shepherd pin, but not exactly a shepherd pin. And then what I did is I pulled out my my Lynx 12, which is basically the Chinese version of the Sega 12, and they have actually improved this in many ways. It's got a better gas system. It's got a better piston and bolt. So the Lynx 12 is definitely an improvement over the Sega 12. And I say this about 3,000 rounds later. At some point, I'll do a video on this gun. And this gun, they actually improved the design. They're actually using a plate instead of the shepherd pin. So you know, they did really good on this Lynx 12. So there you have it, guys. That's my opinion on the weakest point of the AK-47 design. It's that shepherd pin, and it's very easily, you know, it can be very easily upgraded to a plate where you're not going to have that issue where it can, you know, it can move out of position, and then your trigger and your hammer pins will start walking. Now that said, that's not going to happen on the normal shooting. Like, you know, like with this gun, I'd like to have over 10,000 rounds on it. I mean, basically, you have to be, you know, beating, you know, using the gun as a freaking sledgehammer in order to really, you know, get that pin to move out of place. Now, normally you would not think of using your AR-15 as a shovel. All right, so you know, so there's all sorts of spring-loaded pins on an AR-15, but you know, basically you pick it up, you look at it, you know that that's not, you know, that's not a gun that you should be using as a shovel. You know, with the AK-47, you know, sometimes that's not all that clear. So I'm making you guys aware of it. If you get a chance, you know, it's probably a good idea to upgrade it. Like I said, it only costs about $10. You know, if you like the video, give it a thumbs up. Thanks for watching. Post some comments. Talk to you guys next time.